Hello and welcome to the Usage Report. I'm your host, Josh Shepardson, and you can follow me on Twitter where I post as @BChad50. Let's dive right into a very familiar running back situation, and that's in the desert with the Arizona Cardinals. Chris Johnson played 51 offensive snaps this week, carried the ball 30 times, put the ball on the carpet twice, yet still played almost twice as many snaps as Andre Ellington, who played 26 offensive snaps and carried the ball just 3 times, and then David Johnson brought up the rear with just 6 snaps and 1 carry. But he did make waves in the passing game with a couple of receptions. Really isn't a change to the backfield in Arizona. The reason I chose to highlight it is because talk this week from Bruce Arians was that last week was that the club would be increasing the usage of Andre Ellington, and obviously the proof is in the pudding. That didn't happen. The Cardinals enter their bye week this week in Week 9, and coming out of it, I don't see any change in the pecking order in this backfield. The fact that Chris Johnson put the ball on the carpet twice and Andre Ellington still didn't see an uptick in usage, I think tells you all you need to know about Chris Johnson's stranglehold on the top of the depth chart and on the carries volume in that backfield. So Chris Johnson remains an RB2. And Andre Ellington is a little more than a bench option at this point. And to be perfectly honest, I do believe that if anything were to happen to Chris Johnson, you see Ellington splitting time with David Johnson. So I do think his ceiling is limited. I think that given the rash of injuries at running back around the league and the fact that Ellington does have some pass catching skills, he certainly warrants rostering, but he's definitely not anybody that I anticipate on stepping into a flex role, even a PPR leagues, as long as Chris Johnson is healthy, because Johnson has a stranglehold on the top of that depth chart. Next up is the Denver Broncos, and this is a situation that it was actually did go according to how the coach said that it would play out. Exiting the bye week going into Week 8, the Broncos and Gary Kubiak had mentioned that Ronnie Hillman would see an uptick in playing time, that Anderson might start the game, but Hillman should see the bulk of the work. And basically that's what happened. Hillman played 38 offensive snaps to C.J. Anderson's 27. Hillman outcarried him 19-14, but C.J. Anderson had his best game of the season. He ran for 101 yards on 14 carries, found pay dirt once, and added a reception. Now, Ronnie Hillman was not exactly a slouch himself. He scored the game's first 2 touchdowns against the Packers and also added a reception, though he went the wrong direction on the reception. But ran for 60 yards himself. The 3 yards per carry isn't anything to get excited about, but the 2 scores is. And the fact that this Denver Broncos rushing offense really was able to get things going against the Packers is also exciting for those who own pieces of this backfield. I did indicate a few weeks ago that I thought that C.J. Anderson was worth holding on to just a little bit longer to see what he could do out of this bye. I still maintain that. I mean, he's coming off of a 100-yard effort. I do think Hillman is still the back to own, even though he didn't rush for as many yards or as many yards per carry as C.J. Anderson. But Hillman did out-snap him, and I think he is the better back for this offense. But at least Anderson showed some signs of life, something we had not seen previously. And if the Broncos continue to run the ball effectively, I mean, they ran the ball 33 times between those 2 backs. There might be enough pieces of the pie available for both to have some fantasy value down the stretch. Now, C.J. Anderson not going to live up to his first-round draft pick billing, but at least in fantasy leagues, but could emerge as at least a flex down the stretch. So that's what the backfield situation looks like in Denver right now. In Houston, it's a much uglier backfield situation. And we got our first glimpse at the post-Arian Foster backfield for the Texans. Foster, of course, lost for the season. Alfred Blue got the bulk of the carries, got the bulk of the work, still played just 31 snaps. Jonathan Grimes played 18, and Chris Polk played 15. So this has full-blown committee written all over it. Blue did touch the ball 19 times with 5 receptions and 14 carries, but 72 yards from scrimmages. Basically ho-hum. And this is a guy who's averaged an ugly 3.3 yards per carry in his career. So not an explosive back. He's just one of those big grinder backs, and he's basically touchdown dependent. He's not much of a pass-catching threat despite the 5 receptions this week. Basically, his running style reminds me a lot of Sean Green, and that's not paid as a compliment to Alfred Blue. So this is a committee situation. Blue really the best back to own from this situation, but only as an emergency option should you you suffer through some injuries or bye weeks still, Blue makes for at least a usable flex option, but the ceiling is really limited with him. Next up is the San Diego Chargers backfield, and this is a team that was ravaged by injuries. Namely, they lost their number one receiver, Keenan Allen, for the remainder of the season with a lacerated spleen, and Antonio Gates is still dinged up. He did play last week, but his snap count, pretty good indication that he's not at full strength, and nor should he be expected to be at full strength. And with some key pieces in that passing game either out or at less than 100%, Melvin Gordon ended up carrying the ball 18 times, a new career high for the rookie, and touched the ball 23 times in all. Now, his 5 receptions didn't result in much in terms of receiving yardage, just 7 yards receiving, and he totaled just 54 yards rushing on the 18 carries. But that kind of volume is at least interesting, and the fact that they may have to lean on the running game a little bit more heavily makes Gordon worth rostering and maybe kicking the tires on if you are one of the owners that unfortunately lost a back in the last handful of weeks. I mean, we've had Jamal Charles go down, Arian Foster, Le'Veon Bell, Matt Forte, and the list goes on. Melvin Gordon at least has some upside. He was a first-round pick in this year's NFL draft, was a very productive college runner at Wisconsin. I do think that there is some untapped upside here, and he's tied to an offense that can move the ball through the air. So he played 34 snaps at Danny Woodhead's. Danny Woodhead also gets a slight boost with Keenan Allen no longer there to catch passes. It does move him up the pass-catching pecking order. So a couple of backs with their stock on the rise in San Diego. Moving on to the passing situations, let's look at the New Orleans Saints, and boy, did they pass the ball quite well over the weekend. Drew Brees threw it 50 times, bested 500 yards passing, and spun 7 touchdown passes, and he really spread the football around. Benjamin Watson led the way in targets with 10, led the way in receptions with 9, receiving yards with 147, and he even caught a touchdown pass. And while he's never shown this kind of pass-catching prowess before, whether it's with the Patriots or with the Browns, Drew Brees has worked pretty well with tight ends in the past. Just ask Jimmy Graham about that. And Watson isn't the kind of athlete that Jimmy Graham is, but 2 of the last 3 weeks, Ben Watson has gone off, and he also had a decent game sandwiched in the middle. So at this point, Ben Watson is now an every-week starter at tight end, and really that is what comes out of this passing attack and this breakdown of the New Orleans pass catchers. But a few other notes. The running backs were targeted 9 times. Mark Ingram continues to be an integral part of the passing game, catching 4 passes for 39 yards. Actually out-targeted, out-caught, total more receiving yards than C.J. Spiller. But it was C.J. Spiller who caught the touchdown pass in that backfield. Looking at the receivers, Marcus Colson turned back the clock, caught 8 of 9 targets, had 114 yards receiving a touchdown. But this is so far and away out of the blue and out away from what we've seen. Looks like an outlier. I would leave him available in leagues. Brandon Cooks and Willie Snead are both already rostered in any kind of competitive fantasy football leagues. I still like Willie Snead. I was reluctant to buy into him earlier in the season, but he continues to get targeted. 8 targets this game, 6 receptions, 70 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Continues to perform at a high level. Brandon Cooks turned in his 3rd good game in his last 4. Caught 6 of 8 targets, 88 yards receiving, and 2 touchdown passes. Still only has 100-plus yard receiving effort on the year. Still only has 1 game of double-digit targets. But he is playing at a high level. And he was a breakout candidate, so there is some potential that he can continue this hot play. But Drew Brees doing a good job of spreading the football around as 1 guy reached double digits and 3 more flirted with double digits in targets this week. So definitely a passing attack to be invested in. But just know that Watson at this point might be the most reliable, and he's really the only guy that I can say is a definite start week in and week out. Brandon Cook's pretty close just because he does get targeted fairly frequently, and Willie Snead not too far behind. But as far as the pass catchers, and obviously not including Mark Ingram in the back, the fact that he catches passes this year is a bonus. But he's clearly high-end RB2, RB1 actually, probably at this point with the number of injuries around the league, taking away some of the other guys that would have competed with him for RB1 status. But next up, we're going to move along to Pittsburgh. And all the attention was on Antonio Brown this week. He's going to be playing, or last week, and the news was Big Ben would be back and Antonio Brown would be back to his dominant self, the guy who led the league in a couple key categories last year. Was fine. I mean, he caught 6 of 11 targets for 47 yards and a touchdown, and you'll take that. In PPR, standard scoring leagues, touchdown really saved the day for him. Martavis Bryant, 4 receptions for 49 yards. Quieter effort than most would hope for that we're using him. But Heath Miller is the guy that really stood out in this game. And Miller has been a regular target of Big Ben throughout his career. Was targeted 13 times, caught 10 passes, total 105 yards receiving. And while he didn't find pay dirt, 10 receptions for 105 yards is plenty for Miller. Gets the Oakland Raiders this week. Really great matchup. In fact, arguably not a better matchup, though the Giants have been getting gashed by tight ends, and depends on how your league scoring is now. It's a battle for ineptitude between those two teams, but love Heath Miller going forward. He's the fact that Le'Veon Bell is down should increase the workload for Heath Miller, since Miller is another short target in the same capacity that Le'Veon Bell was a safety valve out of the backfield. So do expect Miller to continue to get targeted frequently. I would say he and Martavis Bryant should jostle for the number 2 pass catching duties in this offense. Obviously, Bryant, the higher ceiling, more explosive playmaker, but there will be weeks that Miller does best him in receptions. Antonio Brown's still the unquestioned one there, but Miller, big value boost, probably more than anybody else with the return of Big Ben. And finally, we're going back to San Diego, this time to look at the pass catchers. And as I noted, Keenan Allen out for the remainder of the year with a lacerated spleen. That means that the onus is going to be on some other pass catchers to step up. Antonio Gates played just 33 snaps, but he was utilized on those 33 snaps, targeted 5 times, caught 4 passes for 56 yards receiving. He is the top pass catching option in that offense. Even on a limited snap count, you figure that he's going to be utilized when he is out there. But a couple of receivers emerge as ownable in 12-team leagues or larger, and that's Stevie Johnson and Malcolm Floyd. Floyd had a big effort, 4 receptions for 92 yards and a pair of touchdown grabs. Had 1 long touchdown grab and showed that even at north of 30, he's still got big playability. Problem with Floyd, as it always has been, is that he is boom or bust because he is so big play reliant. The receiver that I think is going to be more consistent here is going to be Stevie Johnson. Johnson playing with the best quarterback that he's ever played with in his career. Sorry, Ryan Fitzpatrick. Sorry, Colin Kaepernick, and anyone else that I'm forgetting at this point. But Stevie Johnson playing with Phillip Rivers. Hasn't missed some time this year with a hamstring injury, but he did have a good showing in his first game with the Chargers this year. And while he only caught 2 of 4 targets this past week for 28 yards, I do think he is going to emerge as one of the better pass catching targets in this offense. And the other guy to keep an eye on, left this past week's game early with injury, is Ladarius Green. Green played very well in the absence of Antonio Gates earlier in the season, and even when the two played together, he was still showcasing that he has some value in this passing offense. And with the absence of Keenan Allen, I would not be surprised to see more 2 tight end sets with Gates and Ladarius Green out there, and it's possible that both could end up starting caliber tight ends. I mean, this wouldn't be the first time that we've seen a team produce 2 fantasy relevant tight ends. Obviously, the most glaring example would be Rob Gronkowski and Aaron Hernandez in New England a few years ago. So not saying that either of these tight ends is that caliber, but point being, if they run enough 2 tight end sets, Phillip Rivers seems willing to look at these guys, and Ladarius Green was a red zone threat earlier in the season. So definitely some value movement in the San Diego passing attack. That's going to wrap things up for this week's usage report. Check out fantasyfootballcafe.com for articles such as these and podcasts such as this, and hop on the message boards. We're only about midway through the season, so there's still plenty of fantasy football decisions to be made, which players you should be starting, who you should be trading for, who you should be scooping off the waiver wire. And our forums have the answers to those questions in a very active community. So get on there, have some fun, and enjoy the rest of the season. Good luck this week, and check back next week.